Ah yes, Dr. Ratio. Veritas Ratio. Potentially one of the most misunderstood, overlooked, and underestimated characters in Honkai Star Rail, ironically both in-universe and in the fandom. I have a lot to say about him, including why I think he could be destined to become an Aeon, and why he might actually be thousands of years old already. This video is, by virtue of being about Dr. Ratio himself, inherently quite complicated, but I've tried to make it all easy to digest and follow along with my logic. And yes, I will in fact discuss the highly requested worm ratio theory and add my own interpretation towards the end of this video, just for fun. But don't skip ahead, because most of it won't make sense unless you've seen the rest of this video. And also, I need to warn you, this video gets very weird, so prepare yourself. If you're feeling brave, maybe you can make a comment before watching, guessing just how crazy you think this video is going to get. And a quick announcement before I begin, I will be starting streaming on Twitch on the 11th, when the new patch comes out, starting around 1 PM my time, which is GMT plus 10. My Twitch account is Lelodi's Law, so you can follow me there at twitch.tv/Lelodi's Law if you want to be there while I play through the new content and discuss it live on stream. I plan to stream regularly afterwards too. Chapter 1, Visual Design. Okay, back to the actual video. Let's begin slowly with the very basics. Dr. Ratio is heavily inspired by Greco-Roman culture, most evident in his visual design. The laurel wreath on his head in the ancient Olympics were awarded to victors of athletic competitions, and in Rome they were symbols of a martial victory awarded to a successful commander during his triumph. One of Ratio's statues also references the Olympics, with the Discobulus statue being a famous discus throwing pose, albeit not a very good one apparently. But the laurel wreath is also awarded to university graduates who successfully complete a master's degree. Dr. Ratio values the health of his body just as he does his mind, waking up early each morning to exercise, and he has 8 doctorate degrees, so both of these meanings apply quite nicely to Veritas Ratio, if you ask me. His outfit is adorned in patterns inspired by the Greek Ionic order architecture. You can see this kind of architecture present in his abilities and splash art, and the patterns extend to his outfit. These swirls are supposed to look like fern plants, both furled and unfurled, giving the design a lovely natural beauty aesthetic. Creatively, they seem to blend with the imagery of the owl on his shoulder, which is a symbol of the goddess of knowledge, Athena for the Greeks and Minerva for the Romans. I'll be coming back to Athena later, so remember this point. His sandals and draping cloth also seem to be a stylized version of Greco-Roman fashion, and the hair on his helmet appears to be shaped like the golden ratio, which both artists and mathematicians alike will recognize as a natural and aesthetically pleasing ratio, and was apparently first studied by the ancient Greek mathematicians because of its frequent appearance in geometry. Chapter 2, Name and the Abyss. Now, I want to talk about his name, Veritas Ratio. Naturally, one would find it quite peculiar that he seems to have changed his name to be that of his university, called Veritas Prime University. I've seen a lot of people debating this point for law purposes, but actually, this entire debate is a big misunderstanding. Veritas Ratio is not named after Veritas Prime University at all. This misunderstanding was inflicted upon us by the English translation team. Indeed, Veritas Ratio's name is actually the Latin word transcribed into Chinese, so they picked characters that basically spelled out the Latin for Veritas Ratio rather than translating a meaning. However, Veritas Prime University is actually in Chinese literally First Truth University. It's not Latin at all. See, when they translated this into English, they must have thought that First Truth University just didn't sound cool enough, so they translated it into Latin instead, so we get Veritas Prime University. I agree, this does sound cooler, but unfortunately for the character literally named Veritas, this has caused quite the misunderstanding. And just to make things more confusing for you, his title as Dr. Ratio is not actually even Dr. Ratio, like his name Veritas Ratio, but instead is actually named after the First Truth University, which means his name is actually supposed to be Dr. Truth, or rather Dr. Veritas, if you're being fancy. Did that make sense? I don't see why the English translation decided to change his doctor title, especially because they turned him into Dr. Reason instead of Dr. Truth, but whatever. Point is, Veritas Ratio's real name was never related to the university, only his official title, and even then, it's not even the right word, but I digress. Okay, so let's now talk about his name, the one that is meant to be just for him and not the entire university, Veritas Ratio. As you've probably surmised, this name is Latin for truth, reason. Veritas is the name of the goddess of truth, and this has some interesting implications that I'll dive into in much more detail later on. For now, Veritas has a few cultural influences, such as in the phrase the naked truth, inspiring most of the art of Veritas to be depicted entirely naked. Reflected in her Roman equivalent, Aletheia, who, although she too means truth, is more accurately understood to be unconcealed, the state of not being hidden, or the state of being evident. Veritas is also said to be hiding at the bottom of a sacred well because of the phrase, "In reality we know nothing, for the truth lies in an abyss." For this reason, Veritas is often depicted naked and in a well, a substitute for the abyss. Interestingly, the Greek Aletheia is an antonym of Lethe, meaning forgetfulness, which is the name of one of the rivers in the underworld alongside Acheron, Cocytus, Phlegethon, and Styx. All this to say, I think depicting Veritas naked in the bathtub could be a nod to the naked truth in a well, as well as the famous story of Archimedes, who, while taking a bath, discovered that the displacement of water could be used to accurately measure the volume of irregular items. While we're here, the rubber duck is a reference to rubber duck debugging. On the topic of the abyss, Dr. Ratio's Ascension 5 in Chinese translates literally as "in a wide sea without an oar," which basically means the task is extremely challenging, yet you're going to try it anyway, similar to the English version with the Latin Sequitur ad astra, which means to go to the stars or aim for the stars, that sort of thing. Hoivers equates space with the abyssal sea almost always, so again we get more the truth, Veritas, lies in the abyss vibes. This is a really good time for me to point out the Road of the Mundanite item. Of course, Dr. Ratio tells us himself that he is one of the Mundanites, part of a council of Mundanite. This seems to be in direct contrast to the Genius Society, as highlighted in the Crown of the Mundane and Divine description. And, of course, this is the quest where Dr. Ratio more or less sneaks into Ron May's research facility, warns us against confronting the artificial emanator of propagation, and casually captures a dimension-hopping phase flame. Anyway, the item description reads, "The lost seeker found traces of truth in the mist, and so he found back to the material world." Of course, truth is Veritas. The mist should be the abyss, and the material world is exactly how it sounds. More hints that Veritas Ratio has been the naked truth line in the abyss. Let's not forget the very casual way that Ratio was prepared to aid Aventurine as he faced the Nihility, almost like he'd been there before. Chapter 3 Age and Equilibrium. And now I want to talk about Dr. Ratio's age. The truth is, we don't have a definitive answer to how old he is, but we can easily infer that he is at least much older than he looks. His stories, which document various events of his life from the POV of a third party, are all actually published in a book that we don't know the age of, called Wisdom as a Privilege, Decoding Dr. Ratio. By the time of the book's publication, Ratio had been at the university long enough for this letter of recommendation to be yellowed, yet surprisingly well preserved, which is not a description for a treasured piece of paper that is only a few years old. I myself have letters I've kept for 11 years that have not even begun to yellow at all, for example, let alone need any special preservation. We're then told that he will be granted direct eligibility for teaching only after earning all 8 of his doctoral degrees and being awarded the first-class honours, which had been vacant for 2 whole amber eras, approximately 500 years. This brings into question how old his teachers must have been at the time too, and the university did not seem in a hurry to replace them. We're told that it has been many years since the award and the publication of the book, and the repost on Dr. Ratio's school notes has the most recent comment claiming they are grave digging this old post to pray to the scholar god. Just to reaffirm, none of this is supposed to be particularly recent. Okay, so now I will mention his appearance in Golden Gears, but first, let me give a speed run of the relevant parts of the Golden Gears story so you guys can have the right context. Just after the Swarm disaster, the IPC underwent major renovations from a Klapoth cult following into a majorly successful intergalactic organization. They're able to be so successful because of something called the Cast Iron Throne, which can control universal equilibrium and direct the flow of currencies and resources in the universe straight into their own hands. But it can only be accessed when you reach the peak of broadened cognition, basically becoming uber smart. This seems to spark a gold rush of sorts where many people are desperate to expand their cognition and reach the Cast Iron Throne. And this is where the Intelligentsia Guild comes in. One of the IPC leaders, specifically Korapal of the Trade Division, works very closely with the Intelligentsia Guild, funding them to build Ismail the Cosmic Library for the purposes of researching a synthetic anti-organic equation, which Korapal believes can be implemented into organic lives in order to grant them all the benefits afforded to inorganic beings. Unfortunately, the equation is, of course, one of the equations of the equilibrium that controls the universe, thus cannot be separated from the rest of the factors and naturally comes with severe consequences. The Intelligentsia Guild members are unable to separate the equilibrium, thus refuse to activate the synthetic anti-organic equation, but Korapal eventually betrays them and does it anyway, making basically cyborg super soldiers. While I'm here, I want to mention that bad thoughts start happening, seemingly corrupting and confusing the minds of organic beings, which may be why Ratio has an emphasis on maintaining his pure thoughts. One of the founders, Dongfeng Qixing, uses whispers of finality and instructs the assassin Genius Society member number 4, Polka Kakamont, to try and murder some of the robots, because they know that the giant robot Emperor Rupert is about to wake up after a long slumber, and everyone kind of wants to stop it, because Rupert will wage war against organic life for some reason. Mythos is involved, so there's no way to know for sure right now why that is. Nous is involved too, and introduces the concept of moments, which are predetermined events that cannot be avoided no matter what happens. Even if Aeons try to interfere, as demonstrated by attempts by both the Equilibrium and Mythos to stop the death of Emperor Rupert, much later at the hands of Polka Kakamond. Anyway, at some point of the research of the Intelligentsia Guild into the Equilibrium, we have the Cogito Hair Salon encounter, where someone known as Dr. 5 is clearly experimenting with the equations. This is what he means by separating and blending good and evil. He tells us plainly, through such a deranged pursuit of knowledge, we can reach a more liberated and higher dimensional consciousness. This is the pursuit of broadened cognition that eventually leads to the Cast Iron Throne. It appears this doctor desperately wishes to be noticed by Nous, and he comments that Dr. Ratio thinks he and everyone else is an idiot. We then get to watch as the doctor constantly shifts between two states and ultimately kills himself in despair and frustration. He has transformed into a mechanical spinning top in the spiral between polar opposites, and his conflicted life ends in an eternal spin between his two facets. And his final words, he tells us that if we meet Dr. Ratio, we have to tell him who the true idiot is. This is in fact exactly what the Equilibrium does. They separate concepts, splitting all beings into an interchangeable duality, thus fusing all positives and negatives in the universe into an equilibrial whole. Basically, this foolish doctor made a terrible mistake in their research of the Equilibrium. After knowing this, it becomes obvious why Dr. Ratio was the one to work with Screwlum, the Genius Society member whose selection by Nous basically ended the war between the humans and robots. Dr. Ratio is an expert in equations, an expert in equilibrium, and the testing of the divergent universe equations is a logical next step in the narrative following what we learned from Golden Gears. And just before someone tries to bring up the Cogito Hair Salon with the Genius Society members as a counterpoint to Ratio's age, let me point out that Herta, Ran, May, Screwlum, and Steven are all active participants in the simulated universe alongside the Trailblazer, so their appearances are not unusual. Dr. Ratio is not a participant, so he has been simulated alongside everything else, which means, mathematically speaking, the simulation believes Dr. Ratio to have existed at that point in time. And again, let me remind you that Dr. Ratio is not part of some lineage associated with the Intelligentsia Guild, so this is extremely unlikely to be an ancestor who happened to have the same personality as him, join the Intelligentsia Guild, wear the same items, and take the Dr. Truth name. Chapter 4, Aeon Ratio and the Genius Society. I should mention now that I strongly believe Dr. Ratio to be effectively the HSR equivalent of an atheist, with no particular interest in worshipping eons. His natural theology achievement is the publication of Eons, a Natural Phenomenon, hailed as the most sacred prophet of Aeon non-theism. For this reason, I don't think he personally follows the Ch.3 Equilibrium, nor do I think he actually wants to be a member of the Genius Society. To be completely honest with you, I think he's actually supposed to become an Aeon. And not just any Aeon, but I think he's going to counter Nous the erudition. See, the concept of Aeons comes from Gnosticism, where they are effectively the embodiment of a philosophical concept, much like in Honkai Star Rail. Gnostic Aeons actually come in syzygies, which are pairs of consorts that emanate the next generation of Aeons, basically born from their union. In Honkai Star Rail, however, it seems that the syzygy pairs are instead supposed to be counters, and this makes sense considering the whole yin-yang universal equilibrium thing. I really believe that, especially since the disappearance of Enna, most of the Aeons have ascended to counter another Aeon, but that's beyond this video and would need its own video. Anyway, syzygies. It just so happens that in real-life Gnosticism, Nous, the mind, is a real Aeon, and their syzygy is none other than Aletheia, aka Veritas, the truth. That, plus the whole mundane versus divine thing, really makes me think that Dr. Ratio has never been acknowledged by Nous despite his brilliance, because Nous is fully aware with all their calculative power that Dr. Ratio, Veritas, the truth, is fated to ascend as an Aeon himself. Specifically, he should become an Aeon that stops Nous, and he probably counters the efforts of the Genius Society too. Nous, the calculator of moments, knows better than anyone that some things simply cannot be changed. Believe it or not, this video actually gets even weirder and more outlandish, and we're only halfway there. Before we continue, I want to debunk the notion that Veritas Ratio is not smart enough to be part of the Genius Society. He has a whole list of academic achievements which I have listed on screen now, and I'll discuss the ones that make sense to me. The most damning one is the mathematics achievement, where he literally solved 3 of the 7 challenges left unsolved by Genius Society member number 65, Elias Salas, which, yes, means he was smarter than a genius. For biology, he published papers related to insects that Genius Society member number 55, Ch.3 claimed accelerated the scientific world's understanding of species evolution by 1,000 years. And let me point out that Ch.3 is a personal friend of Ran Mei, and made for her the Pinkest Collision, a drink that contains insects. Ch.3 would know what she's talking about here. For medicine, he cured a disease referred to as the king of diseases that loomed over humanity. For philosophy, he published What is Knowledge, acclaimed as the ultimate answer to all epistemological questions, which, if you don't know, epistemology is a branch of philosophy that examines the nature, origin, and limits of knowledge. So, he basically solved the study of knowledge. For physics, he established the ratio unified field theory, which is basically mastering space-time physics using fields. Unified field theory was first coined by Albert Einstein, who attempted to unify his general theory of relativity with electromagnetism, but couldn't really, and it's still not solved today. Basically, Ratio figured out how everything works and solved physics. The most interesting one, this is the one that qualified him to get his first class honours award. He led the research on the energy blackbody generator, resolving the energy crisis of the century. This is basically using the radiation from black bodies for power, of which the most ideal real-life black body is a black hole. That's really funny, given the naked Veritas in the Abyss thing. I swear he's on the track to beat the Nihility, and it sure would be crazy if he was currently researching the sea around Penacony. Oh wait, he probably is. There's a document left on the Radiance Feldspar by a student of the University of Veritas Prime, who was researching memory zone biology. They appear to have encountered some of the mythos jellyfish that presumably cause the traces of Enigmata throughout Penacony. This document is weird, so if you haven't read it, I'd recommend pausing now and giving it a read. Gosh, this really reminds me just how much a Penacony story is still left to explore. Anyway, as the Veritas Prime teacher currently in Penacony, this student is probably one of his. But back on the topic of Dr. Ratio and the Genius Society, do you really think he would be positioned narratively one Mundanite versus four geniuses if he was inferior to them? Do you think that the Genius Society members would let him alter their beloved simulated universe if they thought he was inferior to them? No, that just doesn't make sense. There simply has to be a different reason that he hasn't been invited by Noose. It's assumed that he wants to join the society because he has the max level quote,
"If this day I have not gained the recognition of Noose, it stands to reason that I never will at any point in the future."
Personally, I read this more as a factual statement, especially given his research into eons as a natural phenomenon, but there's also his character story 3, where a previous attendant of his asserts he must have been sad to realize that he would never be gazed at by Noose. But here's the thing. The context of the story she gives is that Dr. Ratio receives an invitation from the IPC after working on an anti-planetary weapon for years. This invitation leaves him clearly upset, so she concludes that he's sad about not being recognized by Noose. You know, I understand why she is a former assistant. She's a bit of an idiot. Firstly, Dr. Ratio really wants to help everyone. He calls everyone idiots, but he believes idiocy is a disease, and he wants to cure that. He genuinely wants to help everyone. They even included that in the storytelling when they gave a free copy of him out to everyone for free. He wants knowledge to be free for everyone. So the capitalists reach out to him and say, "We want your weapon you've just finished, and also you have to join our nerd guild," with presumably some kind of arrangement he cannot refuse. Of course he'll be upset. What does that have to do with Noose? Even the former assistant herself acknowledges that he never talked about the Genius Society with her, so it all just falls under confirmation bias. Don't forget he is supposed to be someone detached whose stories are told by a third party, and whose own trailer is narrated by someone else. I simply think, given everything we actually know about him, concluding he desperately wants to be part of the Genius Society feels a bit illogical.
0 points. Next.
Chapter 5, Veritas and Prometheus. Moving on, earlier I said I wanted to talk more about the goddess Veritas and also Athena, so to start here I want to discuss the origin story of Veritas. Sometimes she's considered to be the daughter of Saturn, or Cronus by the Greeks, the god of time. This is because of the idea that with time the truth will evidently come to light. I'll bring this up again later, but I want to discuss a different origin story first, and that is the creation of Veritas at the hands of Prometheus. Honkai Impact 3rd fans probably have some alarm bells ringing in their head right now, but let me catch everyone else up. In mythology, Prometheus is the god that is often credited with crafting mankind from clay, and is best known as the god that defies the other gods in order to bring humanity fire from Olympus in the form of technology, knowledge, and civilization. As the story goes, the potter Prometheus, who crafted humankind from clay one day, decided to sculpt Veritas, using all of his power so that she would be able to regulate people's behavior. While he was working, he was called away, and in his absence his apprentice, the tricky Dolus, Deception, uses the time to create a perfect replica of Veritas, but he did not have time to sculpt the feet. When Prometheus returned, he was so impressed by the similarity that he decided to put both of the statues in the kiln, and when they were both baked, he infused them with life. Veritas walked with measured steps, but the replica crafted from Deception literally did not have a foot to stand on, and thus she became known as Falsehood. The moral of the story being that no matter how good and true something may look, in time, the truth, Veritas, will be known, and falsehoods will be clear. I believe Ratio's tendency to not only hide himself in a statue-like bust, but also create statue clones of himself is a reference to this story. Not only this, but there's another story of when Prometheus was crafting humanity from clay that says the goddess of knowledge, Athena, blessed the creation with reason. Reason, of course, being the translation of ratio. So we have Veritas Ratio adorned with a symbol, the owl. So, back to Honkai Impact 3rd, we have someone called Prometheus, who also looks like a variant of Bronya. To simplify it, they're a super AI remnant of the planet's previous samsara cycle, from when they're all being attacked by the Honkai, which for our purposes you can imagine as alien invaders whose attacks ramp up based on the technological development of civilization. They all know it's doomed, so the previous Samsara people are trying their best to give the next Samsara a good shot at beating the Honkai forces, and as part of that, Prometheus enters the cocoon of finality that controls the Samsara and basically hacks it, so the Honkai forces can't be different from the ones that her generation faced, making the second try much more likely to succeed than if there'd been different, potentially stronger versions. I think it's also important to recognise that Prometheus does appear as a Bronya variant, and the future Bronya variant also becomes the Herrscher of Reason, aka Ratio. Bronya is one of the three main Honkai girls alongside Kiana and Mei, which is why the story starts with them and it also ends with them as origin, reason, and finality. We already have two Bronya variants in Honkai Star Rail, Bronya from Belobog and Silverwolf of the Stellaron Hunters. In fact, that's also why Silverwolf gives March 7th an AI sword called Prom. This is a reference to the Honkai Impact 3rd Super AI Prometheus. Chapter 6. Reality as a Simulation. It's already confirmed that Honkai Impact 3rd and Honkai Star Rail share a universe, with Welt being literally the exact same Welt that travelled from one game to another. Honkai Impact 3rd has a lot of reality as a simulation themes, and that is actually continued in Honkai Star Rail, not only with characters like Silverwolf, who can literally hack reality, major red flag by the way, but also things like the Masked Fools believing that Aha ascended when they climbed to the highest branch of the Tree of Existence, saw the cold and despicable void, the stars operating like machinery, and how the meaning of all things bows before nothingness. It's reinforced by things like the cast iron thrown in the equations that, when activated, can literally influence where currencies end up in the universe. And this brings me back to Dr. Ratio. I think he's aware that reality is a simulation, or at the very least he has a suspicion about it. When he casts his ultimate ability, he says,
SAS Percipi.
This is a quote attributed to George Berkeley and means to be is to be perceived. I won't do this justice, so I'll link a 2-minute video that summarises this concept nicely in the description, but to give it my best go, it's basically the idea that all we can be sure exists is our own minds, thus objects only exist so long as they are perceived by your mind. This leads into the question of, if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to see it, did it happen? George Berkeley's answer was yes, because God witnesses it, but he also believes that in order for multiple people to perceive one item at the same time, it simply must be a projection sent by God, who is the only person that knows the item's true state of reality. This line of thinking gives rise to the idea of brain in a vat, which asserts if you take a brain and remove it from the body, but you use a computer to feed it the information it would have experienced from its senses, then you can basically simulate reality and the brain would have no way of knowing that it is inside a simulation. Of course, brain in a vat is directly referenced in the simulated universe too. This is also the premise of movies like The Matrix, where it turns out humanity is hooked up to a giant computer and living in a shared simulation, not unlike the shared dream of Penacony, except they are unaware of it. The Matrix too has direct references in Honkai Star Rail. All of this is reinforced by Dr. Ratio's talent, Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. This is another idea that asserts the only thing you can be sure of is your own existence, because you think, therefore you are. It's simply logical that the thinker cannot doubt their own ability to think, so they must exist in order to contemplate existence. It also asserts that all things must be false unless they can be proven to be true, and that you must arrive at the truth through reason, not only senses. There's also his Eidolon Activate quote,
Thought is the only means available through which to know ourselves.
Don't forget that Ratio literally wrote the book on philosophical study of knowledge. I also find it interesting that he uses his bust in order to think clearly without being disrupted by any of his senses. And here we have it, my theory on what I think is happening, putting all of this together. I think we will get another Prometheus situation where there is a powerful super AI influencing things. This AI created Dr. Ratio for some agenda, most likely to become the syzygy Aeon of Nous. I think Dr. Ratio will be the one who teaches us that reality is a simulation, and the Aeons are products of codes, and it's all just universal equations that attempt to balance one another. I think this Prometheus may also turn out to be our current origin, or at least the previous finality, I guess, since in Honkai Star Rail we're told the cycle begins anew when finality comes. This is because Veritas is the child of Prometheus and Cronus, and of course Prometheus in Honkai Impact 3rd also hacked finality. Chapter 7, Elation Ratio Theory. And just when you thought I couldn't possibly sound any crazier, it's time to talk about the infamous worm ratio theory, initially proposed by Bladey on Tumblr. Now, to be clear, I don't think Dr. Ratio is a worm, mostly because, well, the worm in question is clearly stated to have died, but there is actually a surprising amount of merit to the assertion that he might be associated with Aha. There's some surface level stuff, like the bowing, the attempts of Sparkle to become a Junior Society member for fun, the idea that he wears a mask just like the masked fools, though I would argue it's more the owl face than the bust, personally. There's also the way that Sparkle, Sampo, and Dr. Ratio all refer to themselves as side characters. This is all very fun to consider, but I have some absolute crack that I've been considering for some time that actually works well into this theory. First is the idea that Aha is actually Origin. Absolutely wild, but I swear there's logic here. So, one of the major influences on Honkai, alongside Gnosticism and the Qabalah, is the Tarot, a deck of cards often associated with fortune telling, and shows up a few times so far in Honkai Star Rail. Now, all these things are closely connected in an esoteric context, specifically in Hermetic Qabalah. This branch combines Qabalah, Tarot, Gnosticism, and more into a structured system. It relies on facts like the Tree of Life has 10 Sephiroth spheres and 22 parts connecting the 10 Sephiroth, totaling 32 elements. The total number of Gnostic eons is 32, so the first 10 eons reflect the 10 Sephiroth, and the remaining 22 reflect the 22 paths. In the Tarot, there are 22 major arcana cards, which are attributed to the 22 paths. It also incorporates elements of alchemy, Taoism, Egyptian mythology, other Christian themes, astrology, numerology, and much more. It's actually a very good system to follow for authors that want to include many cultures, because it incorporates so much already. I would argue that Hermetic Qabalah is the primary inspiration for Hoyoverse's world building across all of their games. Anyway, in real life, the Tarot is split into the major and minor arcana, with the major arcana telling a story about someone who becomes an alchemist and goes down a long path of struggles and successes until eventually they reach a point of personal ascension, where they realize that in order for ascension to occur, every single person has to be ready to ascend together as the world. Now, before that can happen, it is the duty of the alchemist to spread their wisdom and uplift everyone else, guiding them towards their own ascension until everyone is equal and ready to ascend together. Basically, they must become the ultimate teacher, lacking discrimination, willing and eager to teach everybody. Funnily enough, the card where this happens, Judgment, is also referred to by Aleister Crowley as the Aeon, and for him, instead of the final card being the world, it is instead the universe. The main character who undertakes this journey is known as Card 0, the Fool. The Fool is the starting point, the origin of the story, and enlightenment can only be reached by the Fool who lacks the inhibition that would otherwise stop them from undertaking such a journey. Foolishness is important, which is why I think both the Trailblazer and Kiana are kind of brash and a bit silly. Foolish. There's two ways this theory can go. Either Prometheus is Origin and Aha, and they created Dr. Ratio, or Aha is not Prometheus, but rather they are the deceptive apprentice who made a clone of Veritas, who just couldn't measure up to the original creation, and that is what Dr. Ratio is. It would explain why he has some elements similar to a masked fool, while appearing so incredibly unlike a masked fool, and we know from the worm that Aha is capable of making super geniuses. It's a funny thought, and not one I actually believe right now, to be clear, but it definitely sounds just a little too possible. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here, so don't forget to like and subscribe, and for the brave folk who commented their thoughts ahead of time, how much did you guess correctly? Please leave me juicy comments with all your thoughts, because it's probably very obvious, but I love overthinking about Dr. Ratio, so let's go down the rabbit holes together. Don't forget to be there for my Twitch stream on the 11th too. Bye!